Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. So Donald Trump has announced that he's called off trade talks with Canada and will be imposing extra tariffs on them next week. The stock markets took a bit of a tumble, quite predictably, as has happened every time he's opened his mouth. But then it looks like investors remembered Taco, Trump always chickens out, and seems to have rallied again. Mark Carney, meanwhile, says that the talks are still taking place. So what is Trump really up to, and is it going to do him any good? But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button, stay notified. So Donald Trump has announced to great fanfare that he's cancelling trade talks with Canada over their digital services tax, and he's going to impose tariffs on them in like the next week or so. However, we've been here before, haven't we? In fact, I think we're getting to the tail end of things here. I mean, we are certainly closing in on the end of the 90-day pause on higher rate tariffs on countries around the world, which didn't actually include Canada, which was supposed to give them time to agree new trade deals with the United States. I'm beginning to suspect that when Trump claimed that world leaders were hammering on his door for great new deals, which is why he implemented the 90-day pause, I'm starting to suspect that maybe he was stretching the truth a little bit. What do you think? So far, all he's been able to produce. Remember, this all kicked off in April. We're in the end of June. All he's managed to produce is a tariff reduction deal with the UK. He did a big event in the Oval Office where he got Keir Starmer on the speakerphone, and then he held up his papers, which Starmer had to pick up because he dropped them all. At the G7 meeting. That's it. That's all it's got. And all it is, it's a tariff reduction deal. It doesn't enhance any access in either direction. It's just a mutual tariff reduction deal. So are we really going to believe that Trump is going to call off trade talks with Canada, the biggest trade deal he can get, over a digital services tax? I mean, call me cynical, I've got my doubts. First of all, the UK and the EU have a digital services tax on US tech companies. And yes, Trump has complained about those as well, and he's threatened all sorts of things, but it hasn't led to a trade war with them yet. Second, this tax, which I think comes online this Monday, or that's when it has to start to be paid, I believe. It sort of came online before, but they have to start paying it from Monday. It would raise a few $1 billion. I saw reports saying it would bring in $7 billion over 5 years, right? I assume that's Canadian dollars. Not that it matters. That's a paltry sum when you compare the total value of trade at risk between the two countries if an agreement isn't reached. I mean, let's look at Trump's tariff policies so far. Economists warned that they would damage the US economy. Trump insisted, no, because foreigners will pay them. People go, I'm not really sure that's how it works, Trumpy, mate. And he said, no, because the foreign exporters will absorb the cost themselves in order to get the sales, right? Now, yes, sure, some exporters have lowered their prices a little, thereby effectively absorbing some of them. But it has still resulted in warnings of a recession and prevented the Fed from cutting interest rates as Trump would have liked, and they would have done had he not done this. Also, with Trump's massive series of capitulations to China, I think it's fair to say the orange one has realised that indeed his tariffs have partially beaten up the US economy. I certainly think the warnings of shortages in Walmart spooked him. So although I'm not going to claim he's learned his lesson, he's certainly had a few bites on the arse from his tariff misadventures. I mean, let's look at the situation. So let's just work on the assumption that the US-Canada trade talks are entering some sort of end game and agreement is expected maybe in the next few weeks. Trump has a dislike for the digital services tax because some CEOs of affected companies are close to him. So it makes sense he'll try and do them a solid and get rid of the tax, right? He's tried it with the EU, he's tried it with the UK. Of course, he will try it with Canada. However, you're talking about really very small sums of money, less than $2 billion a year as far as I can tell, compared to the cost to US businesses, even just with Trump failing to agree a trade deal. Remember, there are tariffs already in place. The previous US-Canada, or just NAFTA in general, trade deal has largely been sidelined. Trump has already raised tariffs. He's already causing damage to US businesses. So just failing to agree a trade deal, every month he fails to agree a trade deal is another month where US companies are not making as much profit. But then you factor in the extra cost to US businesses. Yes, there'll be a cost to Canadian business as well, but from Trump's point of view, it's the US businesses he cares about. The extra cost to them of increased tariffs, that's going to more than eclipse the amount we're talking about with a digital services tax. I suspect Trump is thinking, specifically because the tax is so small, he's probably thinking, well, they're not really going to, stick to their guns over like $1.5 billion a year tax, are they? It's not worth Canada holding on to it at the risk of harming trade with the United States by a much greater amount, right? But the problem with this thinking is it works in reverse as well. Canada will know it's not worth Trump harming US businesses for a sum much greater than the cost of the tax. And also, the stakes are higher for Carney. Carney stood on a platform at the election of facing down Donald Trump. What's he going to look like if he backs down on the digital services tax? Just like, the reason why Starmer's sticking to it a little bit more, apart from the fact they need the money. But, our Labour government wouldn't look good if we backed down on it. So, yeah, and Trump also, whereas Trump, yeah, he can agree a trade deal with Canada, do you know what? And no political hit if he doesn't get rid of this digital services tax. No one cares about it, apart from like a couple of tech bros. And even they shouldn't care about it. It's measly, it's tiny. It's tiny compared to their own wealth, let alone the wealth of their company. And Trump hasn't even persuaded the UK to drop the tax. We are in a much more vulnerable position. We are easier to bully than Canada. And I just think what's happening here is Trump is doing what Trump does. He hasn't persuaded the UK to drop the tax. He hasn't persuaded the EU to drop the tax. I don't think he's going to persuade Canada if Canada does want to stick to its guns. I just think he makes insane threats to raise the stakes sky high so that it's like a game of poker. When the stakes get too high for you, even if you think you've got a really good hand, you're not certain it's a winning hand, so you just leave the table. It's not worth it, right? And that's what he's doing. It's perhaps worked for him in his private business dealings in the past, but it's not working on the international stage quite so well. Trump is probably getting quite frustrated that the methods that he's built his life on just aren't working. We saw his frustrations boil over, didn't we, at the start of the week, when the Israel-Iran ceasefire didn't go quite as he'd liked. He's not enjoying the fact that he's not in control when he thinks he's like this most powerful person in the world. It's like, how can he, as the most powerful person in the world, US president, have less control than he felt he had when he was just a real estate developer, right? He's probably getting similarly frustrated that his attempts to bully the world economic system into shape isn't working out how he imagined either. But I'm assuming he's had so many decades of confirmation bias in bullying smaller businesses into doing what he wanted that he just assumed it would work between governments as well. After all, Canada is a weaker economy than the United States. Should be easy to bully, right? Turns out it's not that easy to bully. Be interested to see how he behaves as he gets closer to the date in July when his 90-day pause ends, and if he has any trade deals at all to show for it. He was going to have like 100, and then after about a month, I think it was, he was going, oh yeah, we probably haven't got time to get that many. We may not get quite that many. I'm now wondering, is he going to get any? Consider the way he hyped the hell out of the agreement with the UK, which is just, I'll emphasise again, a mutual tariff reduction deal. Yeah, sure, it's net good for the US compared to the arrangements we had at the start of the year, but it's very thin gruel. Let me tell you what I think. I think he needs a real trade agreement. I'm not thinking he actually has a queue of tasty trade deals lined up around the world. And so Canada is his best bet. If he wants to hype a trade deal where there's really impressive numbers behind it, I think Canada is his best bet. But he owes his tech bros, so he's threatening to derail $1 trillion worth of trade for the sake of less than $2 billion worth of tax a year. Yes, I know it wouldn't be the whole $1 trillion that would disappear if he doesn't get a deal, but it's got to be much more than a few billion, right? I don't think this is going to be taken too seriously by Canada, even though Trump is thick and possibly insane. So there'll be another climb down that Trump supporters will claim is the art of the deal, whereby he announces a new deal with Canada to great fanfare, which I'm guessing won't include the elimination of the digital services tax. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.